traupiri te maunga. Ko waikato te awa, ko tainui te waka, pō te tau te wherawhero te tangata, ko waikato te iwi, ko Ngāti Mahuta te hapū, ko Taniwhatanga wao te marae. Tihe Mauriora.
So when I was young, about maybe 6 or 7, we all used to go back to Taniwha for holidays, and families would come together, and we all used to live in tents then, and we would go back there. When you're 5, 7, 8, 2 years old, what you do is you're playing. You play in the marae, you're playing in the pa, or you go down the creek for a swim. Other jobs we had little jobs that we had to do when we were kids, like of course clean up, pick up all the rubbish. But as we got older, our jobs was a little bit of weeding the garden, because Taniwha was well known for marakai, or especially watermelon. There was heaps of watermelon there, riwai, pumpkin. All the kai, a lot of kai having in the gardens. So those were just some of the things when we were growing up. And also when you would help clean up when the old people get together and they start cleaning up, and then you just have to do those little jobs what little kids can do. Yeah.
Memories of Taniwha growing up, absolutely beautiful memories. So in the old kota, there was kind of like a stage. I can't ever remember sleeping in the whare till much later. We slept in the kota, and we had possums as our guests on a regular basis. And it was the norm for us. It was the norm. I know that the whare that we grew up with before the one that we've got now, according to my mother, there was a one prior to that. So my mums have seen 3 whare at Taniwha. And unfortunately, I don't know the names of those whare. So that part, growing up there, I loved. I loved growing up with my Nani Puna. My Nani Puna was always in the kitchen. When us kids would trek up to the waterfall, blackberries used to just adorn the sides of the road, and she'd always say to us kids, bring back blackberries, because she'd make jam. And one of my fondest memories of Nani Puna was always rewana bread, either plum jam or her blackberry jam, which was always homemade, and very strong tea with no sugar in it, no sugar. So, and we learned from that sugar was for manawhiri, because sugar was so expensive. It was only for guests. We weren't allowed it. We played bull rush at Taniwha. That was our go-to game, and I hated it because I'd always used to get beat up because I was the white kid amongst the whānau. I was the white kid. And Taniwha had these, so at the back of the top toilets, you've got those trees that we use when we do, that's what lined the bottom of Taniwha. That's what we had. So we had these tall, I don't even know what they're called, ferns or whatever they are. There was no kind of, I call it a whakeeke. People call it a waharoa. I don't know, but I grew up with the term whakeeke, and it was just kind of like a couple of trees cut out so that there was a space. So I grew up with tangihanga on the maho. Bodies were on the maho or in the tent. They were very seldom taken into the whare, and when they were, it was maybe because it was too wet to keep them outside. I remember our riruhi, if you were coming to a tangihanga at Taniwha, they wouldn't sit with the men on the pai. If you're facing the whare, they'd sit on my left-hand side and they'd stay there. They'd karanga from there and they'd waiata from there. I remember we learned how to drive at Taniwha when all the parents went to the pub. We drive the cars up and Nani Puna was always the one who would stay and look after us. I remember when we had an incredibly amazing fundraising there to build the abolition block that we've got now. And that was really flash for us because my job as a kid was Nani Puna would make me do it. We had long jobs and we never had toilet paper. I don't even understand how we never had toilet paper. She'd make me rip up the newspaper and fold it into little squares like that, poke a hole in it, get a harakeke, throw it through like a string, you know, put it through the hole and go hang it up. I hated that job. I so hated that job. Nani Puna would bath us in these big oval tubs. And she'd also make the steamed pudding in the same tubs.
There was no carpets, and the dining room was, you know, just wooden floors, but it was flash in those times. But they had the kota, that's where all the cooking was done. The men did all the cooking outside because it was heavy work. They had to do the big pots and the big fireplaces, eh? And in the kitchen, when I was a kid, your mum was the one in charge. And she always had a baby on her hip and a blanket on her back. So Auntie Nene tended to do all the telling people what to do. So we were never allowed to play up the front. You always had to stay out of sight, play somewhere else, never down here. So as children, we roamed these hills and played up in the waterfalls and in the bush and in the, because that was all forestry when we were kids. So we were allowed to just roam all day and come back whenever we felt like it. You didn't have lunch and breakfast like you do now. Kids ate when you were told to eat, otherwise you went and foraged out there. So we'd go foraging, eat berries, go pinch the parkia's fruit off the trees, whatever. And you came back when you were told to come back, and it was usually a whistle. So every family had their own whistle, and you knew if it was your father whistling, you soon ran. But the nannies were the parents, all the nannies in the pā here, in Erukari and the other pās, they were the ones who had to save the children. The parents did the mahi, so the nanas kept an eye out on all the kids. So we were mindful of all our nannies, because if they had a switch, you're going to get it. And they were allowed to do that. Nowadays, you can't touch anybody else's children, but in our time, all the uncles, aunties and nanas had a say. You had to listen to them more, and when it came to discipline and behaviour.
Kauko, neke hare tia ngā kōwhatu nui o roti te awa, ki reira ko tō ngā kaura mangura. Ka pai rātu kia mātu kia hare ki te awa. Nā te mea karakau ne taiapa i te arawa. No tātou ke te awa, ea ki te Pākehā. Nā te Pākehā, ka taiapa kia te awa rā ne. Ngā wā umua, haere te ngā Māori, haere te hori kākau. Mahara nagi arawa i te marae ne, hari nge ngā kākau ka hori nge rati te wai. Te ra te awa tikinga te wai mo te inu, tikinga te runga kera. Konei hori kākau. Kākau kaukau konei ina wai o konei. Te taha te keti o David ra. I arawa, I karakia mātu I reira. Sunday school. I arawa. Pai o Korea, Taniwhatanga. Ke whiakinga o mātu e tūpuna, mātu, kāre hāra mai ki te awhi mai. Ko mātu ke ngā tamariki Māori hāre ki te karakia. Kāra mohana karakia na kia waira. I arawa. To my God loves you, ai, koe a God. I arawa ne. No whanganui ia, Bob Kerr. Ko ia te mene te rāku tana wahine. Hara mai, tahi te wiki ia marama. Nā te whānua no I kore e awhi mai. Tangoa me o Korea ne, ngā mātua me ngā tūpuna. Mātua nahe ngā tamari, nā te mea e kai keke. E maha ngā kai a te Pākehā ne, e keke, e inu reka, e rā me koto. Ia mātua ko e rohi Māori ne, te era te keke. Nare mātu I pai ai te haere ki te karakia, tahi wiki I te marama.
I was taken back to Taniwhatanga marae, where I spent from my days of being a child to the age of 25. I was on that marae. I lived there all that time, and my experiences there was just unreal. They were fantastic. Those days we had no power, so everything was done in an open fire, boiling hot water in a copper. We had to put, it was just a copper encased in concrete and heated up, and that was, that's how we lived. And fresh water was out of the tank, rainwater. We had very little in the way of comforts in those days, and I've experienced, those times, and right up till, as I say, 25 years, and the progress that we've made in that time that I was there, and that applies to all the things that happened on the marae, the buildings that I'd seen from what we had initially to what we got today. It's just, it's fantastic, and really there is more to go there yet, and with the awhina of the Tainui tribe, the money coming through, well, hopefully we'll get it all done to our specifications and bring our marae up to date for our younger people for the future.
Muria ke te matanga o taku matua miki I ngā hui, ngā tangihanga o reira, haringau e taku matua piri ki reira, haere I te kura o Taniwha. Haere o paingana, whakaengiana kia noho I te marae. Nā te mea I arau wā, ka haere ngā tamari kia whakaengiana ki noho haere te taha o rātua mātua, o iro te whare wāhia tokoto mai ana te tūpapaku. Ngā whare o Naini reira, ngā whare o mua, e one koto ngā papane, karakane he raiti, e kānarake. Naini, o tiki wai roti te taramu mō I inu mātou. Naini, ia tātou koto e rā mea. Ki runga ngā hiko, panangia te pātene, huringia mo te wai, e rara mai ai te wai, kāri pera I mua. Mahara nau ia mātua haere te tiki wai o te taramu, 44 gallon drum. Hoki mai, hāpena hoki roto, maringi haere te wai. Ahakoa ki kora te awa ki kore te marae, mera ke wai tai mai ki te marae. Pai ara wai ia haune.
And those whānaus that were around there, we all went to the local school, the Taniwha, and the roll there would have been 60 odd when I started as a child, and then when I left to go to Te Kauwhata High School, there was only 7 of us. So David Gibbard and I, we lived around Marae, but as soon as we left to go to high school, that made the roll diminish to 5, so they closed the school at Taniwha. Yeah. So, but otherwise they would have been going all that time, and it was due to the fact that all the Māoris, all the families living around the marae, kept the school going. Yeah.
Yes, when you had I'd say I must have been about 10 or 11, I suppose. We started to. My job was we have a big hui like a paukai. At that age, you were the tea boy, and there was me and my cousins, Michael, Sugar. He was a tea boy. We started off doing that. Other jobs was prior to the paukai. We had to go to the pā and help working, have a working bee and painting tables, building tables, making forms, cutting trees or getting the wood ready, helping, where we can. But most of the time you really want to go for a swim instead of help out. But as you got older, then you had to, you got into different roles of different types of work, different types of mahi. As you come back, you get older and you get bigger roles. Like instead of being the tea boy, I was helping out at the back and in the hangi and cutting up the meat and stuff, and then getting more water from the creek. Those types of jobs. Those were the jobs that you got when you were when you left home. And of course you had more responsibilities that you had to do and you were expected to do them. Some of my cousins, like as they got older, they had different roles, and some of them became grave diggers. They used to go with all the uncles when there was a tangi. Their job was to go and help out. But I didn't go. I didn't like to go there. I'd rather stay at the pa. Michael and myself, and we just mucked around there. I think I was lucky. For me, I was lucky. I think I was groomed into this this type of role, kaumātua role, because when I was growing up too, you know, and I suppose me being a jacknoi, I mean, when the old people would come, you see a lot of different things. Like I saw this old man when they closed the old wharenui, the old wharenui that was Kauriki, and this was prior to building the new wharenui that we have now. There's all kaumātua, he done big karakia, and then he got an axe. He got the axe. I was standing right there. He done the karakia. My grandmother was there, and then he got the axe, done the karakia, and he got the axe and he hit the door. And I asked my grandmother, "Oh, how te tikonga there?" And she said, "Oh, what? Kochi te nei whare, and ko te tikanga kau e moi kei roto I te whare nei, engari." But we still slept in there, even though they put the axe to it, the toki to it, and that was to more or less as a sign of okay, the old have gone and now we're going to do a new one. And then also I done a bit of travelling with my grandmother, and then you could see who were the kaumātua, you know, going to different hui or different paukai, and you know, travelling with those people at those, and when you're really young, they couldn't speak English, and if they did, it was all back to front, upside down, and sometimes you know what they're saying, but when they're trying to speak English, you just laugh, you know, you think, oh man, hard case. Yeah, like when you say, why are you looking at me? They would say, what for you look to me? Something like that, you know, and you would laugh at the way they were trying to speak. But Māori was their language, and that's all they spoke.
With the locals, as in the Kenny whānau. So yeah, because they gave us a lot of work, and I used to milk cows there, and I get paid for everything I did, you know, that's how I earned a bit of money while I was at secondary school and growing up, and haymaking. The local carrier gave me his truck, and he said, there's a truck, you go and use it. He said, you just give me 50 cents a bale and the rest you can have, you know. So that's how Peter and I started doing the hay, because of the kindness of pen galleys to give their truck, because he didn't like picking up hay. He said, nah, I don't want to do that. So I was young, and Peter and I and a couple of others around who we could get, we'd go and contract to the farmers, pick up the hay all around Taniwhatanga and Wairinga. So they were very helpful, the locals.
We were mostly around the back cooking, the younger ones. We weren't allowed in front.
Why?
Well, it was only for the elders, not us. We weren't in that category to speak as a speaker. We were only teenagers while we were only young fellas. We were there to do the job around the back as a, cook, you know. We always had family there that does the job. We knew our job. How to tiki weight, you know, get all the water, bring it up from the creek, and all the cooks, they knew the job, like an Uncle Harridan around the back. They didn't know all the Joe Penny and all those ones. They were my tutor growing up. I was only young, but he used to tell me how to do it. So my job was to clear the mud from the side of the thing while they brought it up and clear it away. So this is, that was my job from that day to this day, and I'm still going as a digger.
I kitea I tō te puna o nani wahati, puia te wahine parenga o rohi. Ko nana tera mahi. Rāua koto noko. Tera tāna mahi. Ko paki tahi riwai. Whaka mai ngā pūhai, haringa mai ngā tamariki. Ko ngā tāne, tā ratu ni mahi muri e tahu te ahi i tunu kaitanga. E te heo rātou, haere ki te puhine, i te patu puaka, kōkinga mai i miti ma rātou. E tehi, haere ki te tiki tuna, te kimi kai haere mo te kaupapa o te rā, ne? Tērā.
Tawarikis, which was, they were on Puna's side, my mum's side, adopted mum's side. Tawarikis, and then there was the Putohes, they were the same, they were on mum's side. Then there was the fowl washers. Then there was the Bartons, but they actually lived off the marae. Those other three families I just mentioned, they lived around the marae. The Tawarikis, Putohes, fowl washers.
The main family living here, the foreman, Nanny Harry and them, and at different times others would come back, like Nanny Muki and Uncle Stud, they lived here. So like that, but they didn't stay here permanently. It was only for periods of time they live here, and then they go off and live somewhere else.
Penny, old Penny, from the marae there used to be the old Ma Penny and Pa Penny and Joe Penny, and your mother, Nancy, Charlotte, or Auntie Charlotte, and Sen. They were there, and Joe, Auntie Puna, Auntie Elsie, and the Ratahi family. They were just callers, and sometimes Mum, if she was there, they were all spoken. That was on the, what they say, on the Taniwhatanga line.
The foreman, or Kani, and his sister, they were the elders. They were They were from that generation. They were the two of their generation that were still alive that I saw. Kani and Huiarangi. Now Kani, that's my grandmother's father, and Hingano, that was my grandmother's auntie. That's Kani's sister. And then you come down to the next generation, that was my grandmother's level, and there were heaps of them there. There was my grandmother Wati, her brother Harry Kenny, of course, and his wife Nana Puna. Paki was she married a Ratahi, and then that's all her. She had 18 children. And then Kahu, there was another one in that age group, and Don Wehi, these are all Hinganoho's children, Kahu here, Don Wehi, Tommy Wehi, Mick Mahu, they're all the same, but they were brothers and sisters, but they just took different names. And then my grandmother's husband, my grandfather's was the Puru, they were from Mokorea. Then you were Kahi, Nana Paul, we call him, Nana Paul, Nana Pera, Puru, and there was Moan, Auntie Mona, but she was a nana too, Mona Wheatley, that's Uncle George's mother, and Moki, yeah, but Moki, that was Tati's, Moki was Puru, but that was Tati's husband, yeah, wife, I mean. And then all of those families, that there were four tupuna. One, Huiarangi, two, Puru, three, Ratahi, and the fourth one was Putohe. When you have those four tupuna name, from the Huiarangi, you got the Toka, the Wilsons, the Kennys, and the Tahus, they all come from the Huiarangi line. And when you go Puru, the Toka, those families too, like they come from the Puru line. Then you got all the Ratahi, and then you got the Putohe. When you got the Putohe, that's where all of our horses come off. And so those were more or less all all the tūpuna who were there. Well, you knew he were the chiefs who sort of ran the place, like Nana Harry and Nana Puna. They more or less what they said everybody had to do. Well, not so much what they said like dictatorship, but you know, because they lived there, everybody just followed them. Okay, we had to do this, we got to do that. Because he knew all the farmers around there, see, and he could get a lot of, you know, cow, pig, and he would get all the tuna, and so he got all that other stuff. But when the whānau came back, they would bring their kai and all that stuff from Pukekohe or from Mangere, all of the some kai from the gardens from up there. So I think that was our role.
So Nanny Noko, our nannies, they were the kwikwis. So depending on who the tangi was, it was that whānau that took it. Normally though, because Nanny Wāti and them were here, they were the main kwikwis. Nanny Noko was just over there, Nanny Paki was just over there, so it was just a matter of them coming together for that tangi, for that hui. They always supported themselves because they saw themselves as being part of all of these marae. So they were always on the pai, being the kwikwis, our nanas. When Puru and Tau lived here, Dad said it was the old lady and the old man that looked after the place. That was the kwikwi or kaumātua here. And of course, once they move away, it's whoever else is here. So they would have shared that burden of looking after the whānau during tangi and setting up for those sort of things, eh?
And then my job was that Puna would say, or Harry, if Harry was home, he'd say, righto, go and get the firewood. Get the horse, go up the road, chop the wood down, bring it back ready for the tangi or a wedding or whatever the function may be. And that was just part of my experience growing up there. And you know, every time there was something on, we'd get a phone call, and then Puna would go and put all the mattresses out up on the wharenui, and then get everything ready, and then we'd go down to our kauta and get the dishes and everything, and I'd make sure the water was there, and they get waters in 44-gallon drums from the creek, just lift them up with a bucket, put them in each time, fill it up, get about six drums, 44-gallon drums of water on the sledge, take it up there, get it all ready, same with the firewood, do the same. And then the next thing would be go and get kai, as in tuna. So we'd set the hinaki and go and get some possums. Sometimes as roadkill, we used to see it on the road, grab it and put it in the hinaki and get it that way. And then there'd be kai moana. We had to go to Kaiawa to get that, if it was a special occasion. Harry and Puna really were the kai chucky. And I'll say to myself, of that marae for 25 years that I was there.
And then, but at the age of 32, Mum was kind of thrust into the role of a kaikaraga. And she was thrust into that role by tō tawane tupuna, tō tupuna, Nanny Wāti. And so for a very long time, Mum had a dual role. She'd go out the front if she was required to go out the front. But she always came at the back. And even right up till she passed away, she was always kind of like that. Mum would always come around the back, make sure the cup of tea was ready, make sure the table was set for the manawhiri. And she was also one of those that made sure that tikanga was adhered to on the marae. Mum had a very unique way of teaching, and I think that generation she came from had a very unique way of teaching. They didn't sit you down and have a wānanga, okay? They didn't say, right, this weekend, so-and-so, this whakatupuranga haramai, we're going to talk about tume. They taught in a very abrupt and a very direct way. Or, depending on the kaupapa, she would kind of teach through a story or through an experience. If, however, you were at a tangihanga and there was whai kōrero going on, and we know that tikanga and Waikato is you know, tu atu tu mai. If there were mokopuna running around, she don't care who's around. This is how she would teach. Get that kid out. Or she'd grab the child and chuck it out. So you weren't taught like, don't do that, darling, you know. You were just told, what you got from that was, if I go in there, I'm going to get thrown out by Nana Jessie or whoever. You weren't actually told that it was inappropriate to do that. In the kitchen, she had a different method of teaching. So, for example, Matt, when Mum passed away, he said to me, he came because it was my mother that taught him how to work in the kitchen at Taniwha. And everything he knows in the kitchen, he learnt from my mother, from being on the Maxis scheme or the Access scheme at Taniwha back in the day, back in the 80s. And he said he's taught his children exactly the same thing. When it came to setting tables, preparing kai, presenting kai, my mother was very fastidious. She was very fussy, and she made sure that we understood that that was an expression of our mana. So in the kitchen she taught differently to how she taught in the whare. Out on the pai she taught differently. There was a kind of, you kind of got from her and even from Auntie Asi that you should know. You should know what's expected of you, and if you don't, what's wrong with you? Where have you been? In other words, and she always said this, titiro whakarongo. Just look and listen, look and listen. In other words, don't talk. Don't talk. No matter ask questions, just look and listen and you'll get all the answers. And if you don't get them there, just keep coming back to the hui and you'll learn. The marae was really important to her. Without her marae, without Taniwha, she had nothing. She taught us that whānau was really important. She expressed that all the time. Look after one another, love one another, kia mau, kia u, ki ngā āhuatanga, ki ngā tikanga, ki te kingitanga hoki.
Ngā huhu a tautau ngirunga ngā rahu o te ahi, I roti te kihini, e nui o ki te tīmara ne. A tautau ngā huhu I runga ngā rahu o tērā o te kaipai ma mātou. E gera o mātou o tērā. Pai, I whakatongi e ara mohora, nā o I whakatō ngā rākau mauku. Ki tango, tērā no ngā mātou kai kīnaki ki ngā tuna, nā te me. Mauku, te mea, te puti o te mauku. Ai, ko te puti. E hani ana tērā nā mātou. Ta pahingia, pangingia te kira te hopana tuna, o te mikitanga tērā. Ko tahi nā tātātou rāko e tupani reiri nai nei. Tino maha ngā rāko I mua, ngā rāko maunga. I te kokona I mua o te whare o te foreman, I re tau a rāko I rā. Te nui o kotoa ngā rāko rai te pahingia, mo te ha, ka aroa mohi wana. Kore pēr mohi o ne, he hanga tika ngai whakatongia ngā rākau ki reira. Tērā, nā te mea hānia na ngā kai oro o te rākaura.
Well, we'd leave it in the ground for as long as possible, and then once it, it was obviously ready to pull out because it'll start rotting, we'd plough them up and then we'd put them in we had a shed at the back of our house, our whare back in Taniwha, and then we also had a rack under the, we had a whole lot of plum trees, as you know, you would know, as if you remember when you were a kid, you came there, and then we used to put all our veggies on these racks just to air them, yeah, and then and because that's how we used to look after our meat from flies. Blow flies and that, we used to have it in the tree with a box and it had mesh around it so the flies couldn't get into it, and it was the same with our veggies. That's how we preserved our veggies. And the other thing we used to do there is we used to grow a lot of corn, and kangapiro was the main stable side for that kanga. Kangapiro at home was beautiful. Yeah, we grew up on that. And that was our job. And again, Peter and I used to go down to the creek, fill all the bags up, tie them up, put them down the creek, and make sure that, you know, she's going to do its business and be ready for, you know, for when we need it. So, yeah.
They just lived off their gardens. Their kai, eels was their main kai. In puha, they grew their own puha crops. And they always had watercress in the creek, so they always had kai, but not meat. Meat was a luxury. And if they wanted milk, because they eventually drank milk, I suppose, they'd have to go and get off the farm or go and do some work for them, and then they got their milk. But other than that, they still lived on kai Māori, whatever they grew and whatever they got out of the creeks. All the men did the mahi kai, so they were the ones that went out and got the eels. So we'd have lines of eels out there. I've got photos of them. They're about 6 foot long, some of those eels. Right up until the 80s, we were still catching those kind of eels here. I don't think you can catch them here anymore. But it was the men's work to go and get all those. The women was very much the kai here. So it might be getting those potatoes ready, those kumaras ready. They had their own pits, That's where they kept their kumaras and pits and their riwai. All of that paddock there, up there, they had gardens, different parts of it. But when we lived here in the 80s, the entire paddock was all gardens. So half of that was all puha. They grew puha all year round, so we were never short of that. And the other greens. The kangawai, that was the men again. The women might put down the corn and that, and everybody helped do that, even the kids. But all the corn was put in the bags, sacks, and taken over to their creek to ferment by the men. And then they'd have to carry it, because they were heavy. It was big work. And so for taniwha, we supplied the pokais for corn. That was our thing, corn and eels. So Koroneihana, their kangapiro come from here. And that was mostly men's work. The woman was to break it up, smash it up. Our wharenui was a very humble wharenui. It wasn't flash like carvings and things like that. We were temporarily relocated, depending on government's goodwill at the time. Remember, we're Raupatu. So when they moved us off Port Kaifino and all of these other pa, we were put on the lower levels. But these were called pas. This was taniwha pa, never taniwha marae. That was introduced, I think, when I was a teenager, the marae name. So wahi pa, for some reason, still gets to be called wahi pa, but everybody else is referred to as marae. Now that was them taking away our pa sites, our fortified pa sites, and the names associated to those lands. So we were put on marae and told that this is where you can now live and reside and have your activities. So that's when we became more settled in terms of where the people gathered.
In the 80s left, I went to go and stay in Australia. And then as you get away, go and you start travelling, you think, oh, you're getting away from the pa, getting away from marae life. But while we were over there, we got a message, or I don't know, it was a phone call, I suppose, that they needed some dishes for the pokai, and they wanted us to send money back to buy dishes. I had cousins over there, and Mary and them. And so what we done was we started to fundraise. We started fundraising and kohi pūtea. And then we got enough money. We raised a lot of money, and we sent it back, and that's where they got the dishes for the main table. When you look at today, because of the settlement between the Crown and Waikato Tainui in 1995, every year the marae throughout Waikato Tainui, you've given a grant, We didn't have those in those days. Everything we had to build and we had to scrape. We had to fundraise. Everything was fundraising for all Waikato marae, not just Taniwha. So you would fundraise in different ways. Some people would hold stalls and stuff. Some people sell booze. That was a form of fundraising. So for us, how we fundraise in Australia is we had what you would call a casino night. Now we play cards, and you have kitty, and that's how we got our money to send back to buy stuff for the pa.
I mohio hau te ra kaupapa. I ronga hau ko wai ngā tūpuna I haere, tua tahi, tua rua. Ka whakaarau, wairai nei, ka hara mai ki konei. Ka kōrero tia, ka whakawhiti ngea rā tau, ka tau ne, ka whakaiangia mai. Tō tātu kingi koroki. Nāni whakaia mai te kaupapa I tono ngea tu e ngō tāua tūpuna ke tua paukai I Taniwha. Tahi mano hai. Te rata wā, I tini ngei te ngō tō tātu marae. Nā tā whakatū paukai I reira, I tā mai a tau ki reira, ngara tu pepa, te gazette. Ka te kahuri ngā ratu ko te ngō Taniwha. Kāri haringa te ngō tangoa. Aroha nagi tērā taku mohio tanga mo tērā. Ko kaumātu haere o mohio o areo, tika kāre paingana kia noho I te whakarongo kōrero. Tērā, te paukai tuatahi mo tātou. Ko whakakorangia tō te ingora tangoa.
Well, yeah, the only thing I can remember, there was a hell of a lot of work for me. That's the main thing. I was too busy at the back, and I didn't really take a lot of interest or notice of what was going on, because there was just too much happening in the back, and I was, just part of that, and to me that's okay. Somebody had to do it, and right up until recently, before I moved to Auckland, that was my mahi, that was my responsibility. I couldn't, fight kōrero or do anything, but at least I contributed something. And you'll always find me in the kitchen, at the back, make sure everything's happening. The kai's there, the meat's there, the water's there, the firewood, everything's there, ready to go. And then at the end of the hui, it was my job to pack up and get it all, put it away, and lock up, and wait for the next one. But as far as the actual pokai itself, I wasn't in the forefront for that.
We've been brought up with it, in it, around it. I've never seen such loyalty and commitment. It's just unbelievable from generation to generation to generation. Your family, the Kennies, whether we're coming back, whether it's to mow the lawns or clean the windows, or the sacrifice. The sacrifice. I don't think there's any other iwi in this country that could actually talk about sacrifice the way our iwi do. We don't just sacrifice our money, we don't just sacrifice our time, we sacrifice our families. And you know what? I think if I'm coming from a place of authenticity and honesty, we don't even fully understand why we do it. There's just something that's very, very innate. And it doesn't just happen at Taniwha, it happens at every pokai marae. The loyalty, it's really extraordinary.
Rua tekau ngā rā whānau, rua tekau mātahi, tō hati sen rua rā whānau I ki te au I reira. Tō hati sen I roti tō tātu whare tawhitu. I ara wā, kāre whakaangia te waipiro. tino tapu rungi to marae. Mahara nahu i a rātou e hui hui ana, wange nui anō i a rātou, o tērā pēngā rātou wānanga i a rārā. Kāri pēni ngā tātou wānanga o tēnei rā, rātou e noho noho haere. I to te porowhita ne, ka kōrero rero rātou i reira. Ka rea moho ne hanga rātou kōrero. O tērā pēo rātou tikanga i wange nui a rātou. Me pēnei, me pēra.
And then there was also people to come and play rugby and netball. We had wood chopping one year from other maraes to come around and compete. They all have a big, you know, they set a date and just probably like the Taniwhatanga Games is today. You know, you just all get there, your maraes will get together. And yeah, we had, I can remember at least 5 years of that, and then it actually dispersed, I think, because everyone was just too hard to organise because there was no one there after that in our marae. So it actually, you know, folded. But I can't recall going anywhere else to play those games, but everyone came to Taniwha because we had the land and all the gear and wood chopping and things like that.
Gypsy, Auntie Gypsy, to ask her for the land over there because he had a plan. Dad says we've got to bring ourselves back in here, but we had to fix it up and there's a lot of work to fix it all up. And so he said we'll bring our programs down and we'll get all the young people from here, from Waikato, that want to be on our programs to come and live here and help do up the marae so we can bring the families back in again, get them more involved. And so Auntie Gypsy said, yep, Cody, you can put a dormitory there and one over there, 2 of them, yep, that's fine. And so that's how we got permission to put up the dormitories to house our students. The students were our own whānau from around here, Waikato and from South Auckland. We had to go and see Uncle Don and Nanny Coco to get their permission too, because they were still kaumata for here, the wehi whānau, and they said yes, to get the pokai back. And there was one last whānau that had to be consulted because they weren't totally supportive, and that was Potini. So Dad and I went out west to see him, and it took about an hour of talking, but him and Dad had an agreement. He wouldn't obstruct and Dad could go ahead and do the pokai and put the marae back in order again. So we moved in. We used our programs to move in. We used our programs to fund the rebuilding of the marae infrastructure, meaning we needed gardens, we needed to get everything going again that would sustain and feed our people and feed ourselves and not rely on shops and stuff. So first things we did was we put in all the trees for the windbreaks to protect the gardens, and then those whole paddocks there we turned them all into kai. So that we had corn, we had everything going up there, and puha patches as well. We started, so the students that were brought here were like Matthew Tata and the Kenny girls, yeah, well they were all in here. Potini's kids, those were the kind of whānau kids that we had here. Whauosas, we brought some of those Whauosa kids down here. So any kids that were in South Auckland that came from Waikato, we gave them an opportunity to come and live here at Taniwha and work on this marae. So to justify having them here, because we had to go through the Labour Department to get the programs in it, we taught whakairo, so the old school here. Francis was the tutor there, he taught carvings to our boys up there. We had the gardens going, so Dad and I think it was Danny, they taught the kids how to grow the kai and put corn into the creeks and do all of those sort of things and do all the eels and what have you. Auntie Lolo, who was the only member of our family that had a bachelor, let alone a teaching degree, Dad went down, we went down to Wellington, told her she had to come home. So she came home to live here and she became the main kwikwi for our program, eh? And so she was kind of like the person that taught them how to cook kai, because her background was as a chef. She was a sous chef, I think, in her younger days before she went into teaching. So she taught them how to cook on the marae. they cooked nice kai, not just boil kai, you know, so how to set the table, because she was very good at her, you know, culinary arts. So, you know, they learned how to set tables and serve kai and that sort of thing. And first though we had to straighten up the whare because Dad didn't like seeing it like that, and we didn't have any money to build this at the time. There was no money in the pot, eh? So we took all the walls down off the outside of the whare and the roof off and replaced everything, and the boys slept in there until we built the first dormitory. Then the boys came down, then the girls came into the second dormitory. And so that's how we managed to house. We had about 40 students here, 30 to 40 students during the week, and they went home every weekend or every second weekend, I can't remember now. But that's what happened. And so for us tutors that were here, we got our breaks on those weekends. And if there was a tangi, well, we tried to work around it. It was very hard though. So we tried to keep everybody away until we got the whole place set up. And once we were off the marae in terms of accommodation, easier to free up the marae then. They could use the whare and the kitchens and whatever. It's easy because we became just workers to them.
Ngā tikanga I reira, karipeni I tēnei rā, paingana te ngāta mariki ke noho haere, noho mai whakarongo ne. Tino rereke nai nei, I ngā wā o mua. Ngā reira, pia haune gāreo I tino mohi nā mahi pēratanga mai o ngā tūpuna. Haere kōtou ki te kori, kaue noho mai ki te whakarongo kōrero. Tērā te kōrero ne. Whakarongo I tērā, wow, tēnō ki tēnei. Ka ngena ngā tātou mokopuna ke noho tō tātou taha, te whakaongo. Ke mau I a rātou ngā tikanga o nai nei. Ka hari pēra I te tuatahi. Ka I te taha te whare, taha te foreman. Ai, ingi tēra taha ke o te taiapa. Mai ngā mātua tūpuna ne, ka wai haringa mai waipiro ki rungi te marae. Nā te mea, mahara na hau, ako taka. Ko ia te wātene o e rā rā. Me ka mau iaia e tangata hari pātarana, ruti tana ringiringa. Ka haringa e tau pātara, hainangi ari mahereni. Te uti mo te whaina. Mo te hari waipiro nei rungi te marae. Tēra tau ratu tikanga I reira, I ki tau tēra nā te mea. I whakātu au mō tako tupuna te rai, me tako whae a rirui. E inu pia ne muri ata te whare tawhito. A teo karare te kimi tuko matu I ataka. Oh, mami drinking. Tēra te kokoro rata ki taku matua. A te ka haere te tō tāua matua ki reira, mauana. Iaia te tokorua, auntie and niece. Ai, whaina tō teatu, tiro pokoriri ana tō tāua whae a te rai. Mo tērā, nā te mea, I hainegi a rāu e taka ne. Mo tā rāu inu waipiro I muri a tō tātu whare tupuna. Tērā, ka rua tino mohi hone me iahu mai te rai ingoa I whea. Tōku ni mohi otanga e. I tērā taha ke o te rori I rātau e noho ana, ko tērā te wāhi karangangia tangoa I raro ki te maunga o te ao. O tērā nake. Mai rāno I tō rātou neke tanga mai ki tēnei taha, wāhi ki reira ni Taniwha. Nā te Pākehā I huri I te tau, tahi mano I warau, ono takau tau. Nā te Pākehā I huri ro te ngā rātou pepa ne, Taniwha. Tangoa nei ki hau no tērā taha ke, karo moho ni hāra mai tērā ingoa I whea.
When I was a child, one of my roles that I was responsible for was when we had a tanihanga at Taniwha. The whānau pani never ate with the whānau because they were in a very tapu state. I didn't know that at the time, but I've come to know that. So their kai was prepared differently, on different dishes, different tea towels, everything was separate there. There was nothing that the whānau pani touched that the rest of us could touch. They were separate. So sometimes it would be nani puna, and sometimes it would be Auntie Hine. I can't remember others. And they would prepare the kai for the whānau pani. My role was to take it up to them, to the old whare. And it had to sit on the grass. It wasn't to touch the maho. Sit on the grass. One of the ruruhi would come, prepare the kai, take it over to the whānau pani. It wouldn't touch the whareki. It would just be just away from the whareki. Then the whānau pani would eat. In the meantime, I'd play around on the flagpole or whatever, handstands or whatever a child does, because I had to wait. I couldn't go back. I wasn't to go back to the kitchen without the tray. So, you know, you wait, you do whatever a child does to entertain themselves. The whānau pani would eat. They'd finish, the ruruhi would go pick up their dishes, bring it back to the tray. I'll pick up the tray. Our hands never touched. Never touched. And so I like to think that the ruruhi were the buffers for anything that might depend on, you know, like, you don't know. We grew up with very tapu things. You don't know who's touched the kai, and their wairu or their mana or their something will go into the kai. So I'd like to think that the ruruhi buff that out, to whakanoa any of that from hurting the pani. It goes there and then it comes back, and then again I'm buffeted and I take it back to the kitchen. And I was allowed to go through the dining room, but I had to make sure I took it straight back to that room there, and Auntie Hine was generally always the one in there, so it would go back to her. That's a tikanga I don't see anymore, and I love that tikanga because it really tells me, you know, when we hear the word tapu, it's kind of like, oh, but it's not, it's actually a very sacred process. You're in a very, very vulnerable state when you're whānau pani. You can't make decisions. Your heart is broken. Your wairu is all over the place. Your mauri's, everything's not together. The rest of us are in a state of noa. We're all good. You can't mix the two. And I love that tikanga.
I'm struggling with that. That we weren't allowed to speak Māori in schools, and I quite believed what they were telling us. They said, well, you know, you won't get a job if you speak Māori, and you could go out there and what are you going to do? No one can understand you. The Pākehā won't understand you. Whoever, where you go to Australia, they won't understand you. So don't, you know. So that was their excuse, and of course we all believed it. And unfortunately, our parents and our kaumātuas on the marae never did anything about it, to be honest. They didn't really support us. I just told them that we got the strap, and they said, oh, well, don't do it then, you know. Don't speak Māori at school. Spoke to us in Māori. Well, they would. I can understand Māori, no problem. But as far as having a conversation, full-on conversation, and writing Māori, no, I've gone, just didn't. I missed out. And the young ones today are really, cherishing the language now. Even our little mokopuna, she's here. She knows she's going to Māori school now. She loves it, you know.
Te wai haere nau ki te kura, patungia ko ringiringa, e tūkoe ro te kokona, ma te rua haora. Ka hara mai ako hiro, kumangia hu kia noho ki rungi te papane, muroroa hau e tuana. Mā te kotoa. Ke mutu te kura, ko hoki māta, muroro te ia nani te marama. O, pō koko hua mā. Ka haere te matako rākau. O kau nani, kau. O te hura tera. Ko mō noki māta ka hara mai e ka patungi e te mahita. I tana toko. Pai kia ka mena hoi ki te kāinga. Na koro a te hura. Kau i korongia te pēwhanga mea o te kura. Kia ia. Kei mea ka perangi te hari te pati te pāke. Ai, te puna tuara tēra te amarama. O, koro. Boia nei ru. Ke tikotonu. Koro Māori mai. Ai, nani. Koro Pākehā koutou. Hea tēra nani. I koro Pākehā mai koe kia hau. Kara reo Māori tōku. Epa, a rongona ia ko te koro Pākehā na. Nei toko re. Pati a mātou ni. Ui e, kare ia mpakamoto pati ia mātou. Ke te katono te kōrero.
So most of us that grew up in Rotowaro spoke English to one another, but we were the only ones that didn't speak English, didn't speak Māori at home, that I can recall. So I remember your parents speaking Māori at home. My father would only speak Māori to us if he was trying to give us a special order and, you know, that kind of thing. But other than that, no, not in conversation. So, you know, Nanny Nuku and them never spoke English. So we'd have to put up with translating in our brain what she's just told us to do. And so we got pretty good at understanding it, but we were never encouraged to speak it, us, my siblings. And that was just the way my mother was.
While I was growing up, the rest of the whānau that were living around the marae were starting to leave. They were heading for the cities, you know, and as in Huntly, Hamilton, Auckland, Pukikohe, the Garden, Market Garden, because work became less and less in the district. The quarry closed, the P&T, they never employed anyone. And the farming, you know, the work, fencing and that, is all contractors started to take over. So there was getting less and less work for the other families around the marae. And it ended up that we, as in the Harry and the Kenny whānau, were the only ones left there. So their role was really the kaitiaki for that marae, and they were always on the committee. And they seemed to have quite a bit of say in what was happening, and they were organising to build a new wharakai and, you know, upgrade our marae. In all, there would have been 30 people around the marae all that time. Yeah, and they all had their own little whares around the marae, and but as the work started to diminish, they had to pack up and leave.
The marae concept didn't really exist in their time. I asked Dad, where were you predominantly? And he says, Mauria, Okerea, Taniwha. And he says, oh, we just moved around. When there was a hui, they'd be gone for a month. They didn't just go for a couple of hours somewhere. So they had kouta in these different places that they were a part of. They didn't get to go down to Taharo very often, for obvious reasons, too far. And that's probably why they had their own pokai down there, their own koroneihana celebrations. But in this area, going to Wāhi, going to Horohora, going to Mauria, those were only within a few hours' journey for them in those times.
The only changes I can see there is the cooking facilities. They're all changed. And where the marae is now, they've all changed. You know, where they bring out two papakas and then now they bring it outside. Before they had it inside the media, inside the whare moe then. Now they're bringing it out. You know, where they have it on the branded thing there. They never used to have it there. The woman didn't like it. Yeah.
My vision for Taniwha is that I would like to see it, all the buildings. We've got our wharenui now. We've relocated the wharenui from on the hill back to where it is now currently, and right beside it we've got our wharakai. But unfortunately, we still need to upgrade that. It's not up to spec, and the grounds are looking good. Everything else is good. We're starting to get our ablution blocks done slowly, but they're not. We need more emphasis on doing that properly, and then having our marae totally functional and no issues. You know, because everything's done sort of half pie when we were doing it. Oh, that'll do, but the numbers have grown now. The people that come back to Taniwha, as in the pokais, etc., and for example, the toilets, they can't handle we haven't got, the facilities can't handle the waste, you know, so we've got to get trucks and to take it away sometimes while the hui's going, because we haven't got the capacity. So things like that I would like to see completed, and then have hui's there and wānangas for the next generation to come and use, and you know, and be proud of it. Like other maraes around the Waikato, we are probably one of the ones that are lacking in funding for things like that. But yeah, I'd just love to see the day when you can just go up there, get the key, everything's working, everything's functional, everything. We don't have to go to anywhere else, any other marae, to borrow more cutlery or plates and things like that. You know, we're still doing that today. It's hard because everyone's segregated. They're all got their own life to live, and I think, and they still want to be in the part of the marae. Don't get me wrong. It's not because of that. It's just that that's just the way of life today. You know. Yeah. So unless you got someone driving that and the funding, and I think, you know, the younger generation are going to, they've got more knowledge now, they've got the education, they've got the whaikaura, they know how to get into obviously getting more funding, and through lotto, tai nui, whatever, whereas we never had that in our day, and you know, it was all hard yakka. Yeah, so that's my future for the ao marae. I'd love to see it being totally finished, and yeah, so for everyone to use and have wānangas.
I'd love to see some nannies living here open. You know, so when we come here, they're there, we sit down, we have a cup of tea. Now we're going to have our cup of tea and we're going to leave with ourselves, because there's nobody to have that cup of tea with. The marae all over this country are lonely, because our generation isn't doing that. I try to talk to my big sister to come back and be a nanny. He o kreta mera, o Māori, they're lonely marae. We got beautiful whare, look at this beautiful whare. Their dining room's beautiful. The marae outside is absolutely stunning. Our nannies would think they're in heaven walking into this place now, because this would be flash compared to their kota and their dirt floor whare. But there was lots of them living here, and that's what I miss. I miss their joking, their laughter, their loud talk. They were very loud people. They spoke very loudly to one another. My husband used to think we were arguing all the time. He didn't realise we're just happy talking loud. That's what the nannies were like. They were full of love and laughter and loudness. And even when they argued, they still loved. They always loved, and the children were always put first. Always put first. I don't see a lot of that now. I always expect to see our kids looked after first, but unfortunately, from our kōrero, our kids aren't being put first, are they? So, they deserve a childhood that we had, surrounded by lots of nannies, not just one nanny. So that's what I would wish for our marae and for our mokas in the future, that there'll be always nannies that they can come back to. And if they're homeless, they've always got the marae. So I've been called a few times, I've been kicked out of my whare, auntie, can I go back to the marae? You go, bub, pay the power, look after yourself, keep it clean, and when you're done, leave it the way you find it. That's what our marae should be, our homes. They're not really like that. I want that for our mokas. Let it be a place they can come when they're desperate, when they're lonely, and they need somebody to awhi them.
I guess from a tangible point of view, I'd like to see our marae become a lot more modern, a lot more functional, a lot more practical, a lot more accessible. From an intangible point of view, or I'd like to think that my nieces and nephews, our mokopuna, my cousins, all their mokopuna, I'd like to think that Taniwha will continue for many years to come, generations to come, to be the centre, is you have a hub and then you have everything else around it. That Taniwha is what draws, it just pulls us back. It's like a magnet. I'd like to see our whānau flourish and thrive in their Taniwhatanga and whatever that means, however way anyone defines that and interprets that. And that we're like 7 generations there and we still know each other. We still know. How many families can say that? 7 generations later, we're still strong. 7 generations later, I'm being called a nana by nieces and nephews who, by their mokopuna. My nieces and nephews are like 10, 15 years older than me. I'd love to see that there's still a richness and a depth to our whānau and an appreciation for where we've come from and where we are. I'd like to see that our whānau are in a very deep place of gratitude and are no longer coming from a place or functioning from a place of poverty, holistic poverty. I'd like to see that we have a wealth of talent and resource, human resource that we can call upon at any time for our pai, for our kitchen. I'd like to see the experiences shared so that everybody has what I've kind of really fallen in love with the word global. So that at Taniwha we're global in the sense that we support wider thinking, greater ways of being, but still being able to maintain those things that are really intrinsic to us and value that, really value that stuff. Allow people to speak, hold the space, no longer be afraid or of being afraid. I just love to see our whānau prosper and just totally flourish in anything they want to do, and that Taniwha is the basis and the foundation for that, and the sense that that's our absolute te ranga wawa. I can't imagine my life without Taniwha, even though sometimes I wish I could. And I want to be honest about that. Sometimes I wish I could really separate myself and sever myself. But something keeps pulling me back, and I just yearn and I hunger and I thirst, even though I know sometimes what the outcome's going to be. But if that deep love for Taniwha can continue to spread and continue to be nurtured and continue to be cherished and valued and everything that comes with that, then I think for generations to come we're going to have a very formidable and continue to have a formidable family and a people.
I think first get all the infrastructure done, be everything sustainable, a living and workable marae. I like to have all modern comms in the kitchen and everything up to scratch. I'd like to see that te reo be spoken back like the old people do. Tikanga, everyone adhere to the tikanga and know how things work. Karanga, waiata, all those types of things. When I was growing up, the old people they used to do a lot of raranga, mahi whāriki, mahi kete. Oh man, I remember we had to go and clean up all of the flax and stuff and go and help them when we were small. That's another job we had to do. I like to see all that come back. I like to see our the next generations, you know, I like to see them do well in both worlds, in the Māori world and in the Pākehā world. I'd like to have a museum there. When I say a museum, just a little museum at Taniwha. I'd like to see a lot of people use the marae. When I say people, like organisations, schools and all that, use the marae, because where Taniwha is situated, you know, it's out of the way, and yet it's not too far from the towns like Huntly, Taniwhatanga, Hamilton, Auckland. Well, Auckland about an hour away, hour and something. So really, it's in the bush, but it's also close, and that's what I like to see. In my travels, I've seen especially down in Ngāti Tūwharetoa, they've utilised land where they have hot houses. They have a milk factory. They have their own Māori milk factory, and in the hot houses they grow tomatoes and capsicum and export it out to Japan. See, before the coming of the Pākehā, Tainui used to export to Australia and America. We had flax mills, we had flour mills, we had all of those things, and we supplied all of Auckland. When I say we, Waikato as a tribe, Waikato Maniapoto, supplied Auckland. But when the settlers and missionaries and all those people came, no, it all dwindled away. They took over. But I'd like to see those types of things happen again for our people at Taniwha. You need to put strategies in place to make things happen. It mightn't happen in my generation, but if you have things in place, plans, strategies, and all that stuff, well, you can use that. You can use those as blueprints, I suppose, to start adventures such as those things, such as those dreams. Aka group too. I think we got a lot of talent at Taniwha. We've got musicians, we've got carvers, we've got people who know how to rāranga. We've got people who can now learning to do korowai. We've got people who are in corporate positions, and and yet if we can utilise all those things, man, we can do a lot of stuff. Yeah, but the thing is connecting and working together.
Tikanga kirunga te marae Aue, aue Te aroha e te iwi e Tō tātou waka e Te rangi maria e Te hoi o runga kua puna te aroha e Kei te ngaro mātou e, ta whiti koutou e. I te ngaro kuki te ta whiti kua kai mai. Aue, aue, te aroha e te iwi e, tō tātou waka e, te rangi maria e. Te hoi o runga, ko puna te aroha.